And I must commend the gentleman from the other place who led off the debate, certainly while recognizing the institution which laid the foundation for him to provide so astute delivery of the government's fiscal policy. Indeed, Mr. President, I would say that, in my opinion, the debate seems more focused this year. It's a bit louder, but there's definitely what I would like to call touch points. I believe, sir, that before we get into any debate as to where we are, well, let's take a look as to where we were in 2024. I think, sir, that if we were to look at the economic snapshot which was provided, in 2024, debt to GDP was at 114.6. It's now at 101. In 2024, sir, there were 33 weeks of import cover. We're told, sir, that they currently have 31.2. In 2024, sir, the rating was B-/B by the international credit rating agencies, depending on how you view them. And that rating is now a B positive outlook. Inflation in 2024 was stated to be 5%. It's now stated to be 1.4%, with some commentators argue that the price index being utilized by the central bank to determine that 1.4 gives rise to some level of scrutiny. But we won't get into the weeds, sir. We also see, sir, that unemployment has come down from 8.3 in 2024 to, I believe, 7.1. So, sir, by all metrics, a government which sees itself in this position can say, look from where we came to where we are. Also, what should be noted is that there is actually a fiscal balance of positive 1.5%, which is coming from a negative 4.5% in 2020-2021. So I would say, sir, that it's fair to say that we have positive economic indicators in 2025. We, however, sir, find ourselves debating a budget in which, while recognizing these positive economic indicators, say that we anticipate revenue of 3.9 billion, but we are looking at expenditure at 5.1 billion, and there's an estimated excess of total expenditure over current revenue of 1.15 billion. So the substance of my contribution will be, sir, to attempt to capture some of government's position, to attempt to crystallize some of the opposition's position, and then, of course, to offer my humble commentary with regard to where we find ourselves. At lunch, some of the senators were debating the question, and I'm sorry for telling tales out of school, whether or not there's any economic philosophy which guides the discussion that we're about to have. But I think both the leader of government business and the first opposition senator who spoke, Senator Walters, both says, well, economic philosophy aside, what's really important is how people, how citizens, how all of us are impacted by whatever it is the government does. And that's why it's so important that, as far as possible, we seek to articulate the different perspectives. And Mr. President, I like the fact that we have vigorous debate. That's what we should have. It shouldn't be that someone comes and says, well, this is it, and this is how it has to be. The hallmark of a democracy is you're able to say, well, I don't think that's right. I think you can do this better. So rather than viewing commentary that is negative of a proposal, because all of us as professionals have to deal with the fact that people are allowed to tell you what they think about what you're doing. And I think what we have here is an opportunity to embrace the debate, active citizenry as it's called, and see if through this refinement process, we do something that's better for the people of Barbados. So, government's position, and I'm not capturing the entirety of the economic debate, I'm just putting forward my synopsis of what I heard today. Government's position was that they have been steadfast with proper stewardship. They have done what they have did because of where the Democratic Labour Party left the country. Despite the focus on macro policy, there was also detailed on micro issues such as buses, garbage. They sorted out the situation at the University of the West Indies. They have utilized experts when necessary. Foreign interactions were necessary and have resulted in benefits. And the energy policy, which is being laid out, is one which will redound to the benefit of Barbadians. The opposition has raised concerns with the government's quantum of taxation, concerns with regard to the quantum of borrowing, asking somewhat hard to measure questions as to how do we feel about where we are. Is similar to when there was a previous debate in here, sir, as to measuring investor confidence, that metric. Someone says, well, you can look and see all the cars driving on the road, and the question is, how do you measure that, sir? Questions oppositions raised about the maintenance of the infrastructure, school buses, quantum of consultants, travel of the Prime Minister, cost of living, lack of intervention, it was quite lengthy, sir, lack of intervention, reprice gouging, write-offs of VAT, NRSL removal, port issues, reduction in spending power, utility costs, of course, the attack on hope, why so much in fiscal reserves, and generally comments on crime. All good, all necessary, and all which help to shape this consultative democratic process in seeking to have a debate as to why what is being done, and perhaps question or make suggestions as to alternatives or refinements or way to say, hey, maybe we can do this a little better. So I thought, sir, that having captured these two perspectives, that we have then a discussion about what I call some topical points from within the actual budget presentation itself, sir. The first one, I think, is the Resilience Fund, which I believe the government has been quite clear in laying out its purpose. I don't think anyone can say we do not need a Resilience Fund. I believe our neighbors to the south call it the Heritage Fund, Stabilization Fund. Governments create this reserve of revenue for utilization in times of crises. The argument, which I believe has been laid out, and I'm sure will be corrected if I've not captured it properly, is that having come from a time where there was not that capacity, now that we have made a certain amount of progress, let us put some in reserve to deal for the rainy day or the issues that we are anticipating. I think all in all, this is a sensible proposal. What is going to cause issue, of course, is the funding of it and how that funding has been communicated and or explained. Sir, the issue of the dormant accounts and utilization, I've heard the debate in the other place. I've seen how it's been portrayed in different aspects of the press. If it's one thing we're not short of in Barbados, sir, are legal luminaries with interpretations of anything. I would suggest that the government continue its efforts to make it extremely clear as to the how, what, why, when, because when people hear that you're taking up money from bank accounts, it doesn't sound good. So even if you have a legal basis, even if you have a precedent, even if you're showing it's redounding to the benefit, you still have to deal with the perception, the communication, and if there's going to be misinformation. The other aspect, of course, as was raised earlier, is the utilization of the increase in the contribution for the funding. And that utilization means increased costs, albeit minor. Albeit minor. So if you're moving up a percentage point and you're telling someone it's only $20, someone may say, but that's another 20 you're taking from me. Why are you doing this again? Conversation, continued communication, and explanation, sir. The other point I wish to highlight is the tax break for restaurants, the duty-free concessions for certain restaurants to make them able to compete with those who are not attached, make them able to compete with those who get duty-free concessions due to their being attached to hotels. I think this makes sense. I think it helps to even the playing field. Of course, even within that category, I believe that there were some qualifiers which you would need to particularize in detail in terms of the implementation with regard to how they are able to tap in to that duty-free reserve. But all in all, it's a good concept. It makes sense. We see the amount of tourists we have on the island. Let's see how we could feed them. But a question, sir, a question is, with these gains in taxes, by tax reduction, are there going to be a reduction in price? But sir, it's winter season in a reduction. You know that, sir, as a fine dining man, sir. There's no reduction. Winter season prices will make you holler. So it's always a question of how. We had this debate, sir, where we were discussing the government assistance during COVID for hotels. If you're being supported by the state in terms of your entrepreneurial exercise, should there not be some give? Should there not be some recognition? But again, maybe that's an appeal to a human sensibility which does not deal with considerations of an econ. The other topic, sir, is the $300 grant, the labeling of it as a bounty, depending on where you stand, is very interesting. Commentators or speakers in the other place will say, but you should be grateful, that's a good sum for a lot of people, and if you don't recognize the value of $300, well, that means that you're too posh. Then there are others who say, well, $300 can't do nothing for you in the long run, and then look at the steps you have to take to get the $300 in the first place, and who is going to go through all that, and we know NIS and the difficulty it has on a good day, so much less to disperse this $300. In my opinion, the $300 is a good start. It's a good start from the perspective of times have been hard, we want to give you something back. But I want you to stick a pin, sir, and allow me to come back to this point at a later time. Another topical area, forgive me for calling it this, the salt tax. The 20% tax on salty foods to go up online and put it in with the tax on sugary items. I understand what the government is doing. It makes sense. Depending on who you speak to, there are those who would say this is not going to change behavior, so it's a money grab. Then, of course, the socioeconomic persons will say, well, there's only a certain segment who buy this type of stuff because they have no choice, because of the affordability and the pricing. Whatever it is, the government has laid out its reasons for the proposal. May I suggest, sir, a pivot in terms of how we approach it? Besides the tax on the salty items, how about positive incentives or positive reinforcements? So would the government be willing to consider something as a deduction for gym membership? Let me build, or let me land the plane, as they say. Maybe I'm inspired by hearing the Prime Minister in the other place speak about the knock-on effects of building houses. If we give deductions for gym memberships, would lead to business development in that you need more gyms. Two, we will reduce the burden on our beloved Minister of Health in terms of combating NCDs. Three, it also is a factor in terms of encouraging healthy living for the entire nation by people being able to go to the gym and exercise more regularly. So, sir, in my mind, it will be literally a win-win for everybody. You get business development, you get a reduction in NCDs, you get an incentive for persons to take care of themselves, because at the end of the day, gaming and monetization, as a whole other topic, is how we humans are motivated, but that's a whole other topic, sir. Sir, another area of the budget proposal which I found interesting, and I think I want to spend some time here, is the property transfer tax from parent to child transfers, the removal of the transfer tax for inter vivos disposition between family members. All I'm pretty talk to say is that if you wish to give property to a family member, I don't know how the language of the legislation is going to come out, but let's use the word family member for now, or child or kin, that it is done without having to pay the property transfer tax, which currently is about 2.5%, which then results in it being somewhat burdensome. This, sir, is a good thing. This allows the transfer of real property, which we know how we value that in this jurisdiction, from parent, hopefully, to child, so that the child, let's say, child wants to use it for financing purposes, is able to go to the bank and say, I would like to do something with this property. Currently, if the property is in the parent's name, you then have to get the parent involved in the do, and we know our banks are very detailed in terms of their risk concerns. They will, of course, have to look at the parent's age and the parent's ability to consent and whatever issues may arise. This will help to ease the burden for young professionals who are seeking to get a leg up. And I'm going to come back to the young professionals, so I want you to stick a pin here, along with the previous pin for the $300 good start. Now, sir, indeed, whenever I hear, though, of property and transfers and tax, we always remember that we have a tax assessment process going on, and we wait with bated breath to see the new tax bills that are coming out. In listening to the debate in the other place, I heard a member of parliament continue to request assistance for the BRA to rationalize previous issues that still exist. Sir, we need to understand how these things work, and the fact that even for the best of intent, consistent, detailed, and pragmatic resolution of property and tax is extremely difficult, and is something which requires manpower and resources to attend to. But the concept of tax and the concept of value, it reminds me of a story, and I was trying to find the actual source where it came from. I just assume it's an anecdote from time immemorial. But apparently there was this king who allowed persons who passed through his territory to declare whatever value that they wanted for their goods for tax purposes. So you turned up to his kingdom and you had a bag on your back, and the fella said, how much is that? How much of that stuff you have in your bag? And they will let you say whether it's worth $50 or $10. The trick was that the king reserved the right to buy your items for the value which you declared it to be. And I say that to say that when we talk about property transfer tax and property and assessment values, homeowners sometimes find themselves in a conflicted position, wherein for land tax purposes, you want the land tax to be a little lower. You're vexed if somebody in the neighborhood selling it. But when it's time to sell, whether willingly or not, you want it to be real market value, and you will get into all of this. Consistent determination is one of the issues which the BRA has to face itself with and has to be able to deal with when we're dealing with these type of issues, sir. So something as simple as transferring an asset inter vivos, the calculation of that value, even if it is waived, still needs, I would assume, sir, to be recorded and to be determined. Sir, I don't think anyone can have an issue with the increase in the maternity leave and the granting of paternity leave. It's progressive. It makes all type of socioeconomic sense. I think it's something which the government should rightfully take their kudos for. When you do something that's positive, you're allowed to take the praise. If you do something that's negative, by the same blush, take your licks. Simple so. Simple so. Mortgage insurance, Mr. President. I have some knowledge of how the mortgage insurance regime works. The concept comes from a good place, wherein, same thing we were just speaking about, land tax value of property, someone doesn't have all their financial ducks in a row to secure lending for that property, you get mortgage insurance so the bank feels comfortable to lend. This is a good idea, but the execution, Mr. President, the execution is going to be key. One, the necessary legislative input to expand it beyond its current realm. Two, the willingness of the banks to accept it as something enough to bolster the risk portfolio. And Mr. President, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The days of someone looking at you and assessing whether or not you are a good person to take a chance with are done. It's all AI, it's all algorithms. You find yourself in a situation where I have had to go and get mortgage insurance from a certain financial institution just to top up the difference, because at the time I was unable to pay more than, I think it was, they wanted 85% of the value in terms of the house to equity ratio in terms of the loan. The concept that this would provide or open up the floodgates with regard to home financing, I believe to be optimistic at best, sir. And a healthy amount of skepticism in terms of what the market dictates needs to be introduced. Because we have all been there dealing with the banks, and the banks are not doing it because they don't like you. The banks are doing it because they have to justify to their shareholders why the money was lent to the individual if it goes south. It's a good idea, but it needs to be bolstered with regard to whatever instruments or assurances the lending institutions would need to go along with it. But again, I understand where the idea is coming from, but be careful in asserting that because it is done, it would lead to a certain amount of economic results, sir. Sir, the credit unions ought to be rejoicing because they have been clamoring for their deposit insurance for years. And they have gotten their deposit insurance of $25,000 so that, like the banks, if you have $25,000 in the credit union and something happens to it, your money is secured. Here's the issue. Not all credit unions are created equal. I believe my brother Senator Nichols at one time was in here talking about how much the FSC was focusing on the credit unions and why they don't go and focus on other institutions. The reason they attract the attention that they do is a historic, which we won't get into now, but there is a question of all the credit unions being at the level for the government to provide the $25,000. So while we recognize that it is in principle what ought to be done, I assume there will be an internal qualification and a risk measuring process to determine which credit union this is extended to. However, It is something which we would wish the government luck, because we can see the benefit, all of us, in terms of supporting the credit union, as stated, to unlock the billions of dollars that is there. Now, to allow syndicated lending makes sense, but it's one thing to allow syndicated lending, which, sorry to explain it to you, Mr. President, which is getting more than one credit union to extend money for a project, but it's another thing to actually see it done. It's hard enough for the banks to get it done. It's hard enough for the lenders, lawyers to get it done. So when the credit unions who are new to the game are introduced to it, the legislative framework, the policy advice, and of course the projects. And then of course, do you want them to be doing that without a certain level of stress testing and risk mitigation available? So the FFC has to keep its eye on the ball. Is there going to be an increase in funding for the FFC officers who have to be doing this now? Because we're now saying we're taking this money, which is traditionally belongs to a certain demographic, and saying, do more. So there's certain projects which were touted on behalf of certain credit unions, sir, very loudly, which have gotten very quiet. And from experience, you don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but these things do not necessarily guarantee economic development. They're good ideas, but it's a question of implementation and resourcing and rollout. I believe someone in the other place says you have to stick the landing, sir. The other topical issue, sir, and this is all from the government's presentation, not in here, but in the other place and from the documentation available, is the new visitor licensing fee. And the new visitor licensing fee, sir, from $10 to get a license to $10 per day, it's an increase that you will describe, sir. I don't know what's the proper accounting term, but it's a bit high. So you're moving from $10 all the time to $10 per day. So if you have a 1 week rental, it moves from $10 to $70. Now I had a discussion, I shouldn't say my wife, as to whether that's high or not, but this is what I am seeing, sir, and I've had discussions with the car rental gentleman. There is already, and I'm sure the government recognizes because they said they will take time to deal with the issue, there's already there's already a unlicensed car rental market exists in Barbados. So you can go and get a car which doesn't have an age plate and rent it for a certain amount of money. The age plate person now is faced with his markups because he has to pay his taxes, NIS, and all the other good stuff, which is going up, plus the new fee of $10 per day. A customer who is less than scrupulous, so let's put the econ hat on now, and I'm referring to Daniel Kahneman, thinking fast, thinking slow. A customer who doesn't have all the moral shackles is saying, well, I will go to the fellow who I don't have to pay this extra money to. Because the guy who doesn't have an age plate and is not doing the legal rental mechanism is not going to be asking you for any license or any license fee. So you may find that as well-intentioned as the proposal is, it may result in an issue for the car rental businessmen. And not only that, Mr. President, I went on the website last night because I have another one of my friends visiting to get the license. And the BRA told me quite blithely that, well, we're gonna try transaction again at another time. He is still waiting with the email that he submitted to get the license. So he has to go to a car rental chap to get the license. Which then raises another issue, sir. If it is implemented as contemplated, we're then relying on who to, one, calculate the tax for the period of the rental, two, to segregate and account for the tax for the period of the rental, because If the BRA website is not working and the legal car rental persons have to collect this money, segregate it, and provide it to the government, it raises issues and of course it increases costs. So the idea, while we understand where it comes from, the practical implementation will need to be carefully considered, and you would need to give whichever entity is responsible for it the resources for it to work. I went on the website, sir. It was very fancy, it was very good, apply everything, fill out all the information, click buy. Still waiting, sir. So this is the practical consideration for the idea. And sir, I think we will all remember, this is a Senate which does not make noise for making noise sake. When we dealt with the issue of the stickers and the license, the back of the number plate and the different stickers, and we said, this is a good idea, but the MTW can't get the driver's license done. You can have them changing stickers every year? With which printer? Which public servant, sir? So these ideas, while they're good, we need to look at the mechanisms by which they're introduced and how we can properly capture it. In other words, there is revenue. So if we want to get the revenue, let's make sure the BRA website is perking. Let's make sure that the legal car rental fellas are given, maybe there's a machine, maybe there's a dongle, something to capture the people who are doing the rental. And guess what? Maybe we find a way to give them a taxis, because they will be the ones dealing with the collection and then the impact on their business by this increased cost. Suggestions again, sir, for the government. Sir, the final area with regard to the government proposal, sir. How much time do I have, Mr. President? Sir, the final area with regard to the government, another 30 minutes, sir. The other area with regard to the government's proposal, sir, is the legislation to deal with the proposed insurable earnings removal. Here's where it gets tricky, sir. Now, I like the idea of the proposed real estate unit trust. I like any idea which allows for an ordinary citizen to invest in Barbados, sir. You've heard me lamenting about the lack of investment opportunities locally. What happened though, sir, was that in the course of this presentation, I realized that the tax credits which were proposed for the 2024 budget, the legislation wasn't put in place for those benefits to be rolled out. So we have a situation, sir, if you may recall, the 2024 budget proposed 13 tax credits, sir. The technological credit, which is 100% tax credit for local companies digitizing and re-engineering their business. The 50% tax credit for the provision of elderly care facilities and hospices. The 50% tax credit to boost investment in sports venues. The 50% refundable tax credit for projections resulting in net zero emissions. And 50% refundable tax credit for investments in projects identified and approved by the government. The idea, the execution, and the legislation all has to be done. So in the same instance, when we're dealing with this instance where we're saying, hey, this money is to go towards this resilience fund, or this money is supposed to go towards this real estate unit trust, when is the legislation coming? In other words, budget, execution, implementation, resulting economic activity is contingent on other steps. And if those steps are not done, sir, it's just talk. So, good ideas, but we have to support in getting it done. Okay. Now, I want to do a deep dive now into the actual numbers, sir. Know your numbers, man, sir. Know your numbers, man, sir. And it is by providence that we have Senator Reid here, the new minister who will be dealing with these issues. Starting at page 100, sir, cybersecurity. Okay, so I go to my page 100 here, sir. 100 top left, sir, application, Ministry of Industry, Innovation, Science and Technology. Let me don't speak out of turn. If I may have made the minister wrong, please forgive me. Application of Modern Information Technology, Cyber Security Subprogram 0036. Now we see here, sir, that the total non-statutory recurrent expenditure in 2024 to 2025 is 3.6 million. Revised estimates is 3.6 million. There's a jump in the budgeted estimates to 6 million, and then it's back to 3.9 million for the forward estimates in 2026 and 3.9 for the forward estimates for 2027. Sir, we know that this is a critical issue with regard to Barbados and its development. We've heard that there is supposed to be a center to fortify national cybersecurity and cybersecurity operations. We see that there is provision for a $2 million increase between 2025 to 2026, but then it reduces by the same $2 million. Given the importance of cybersecurity, I look forward to the government's explanation with regard to how it's being funded. Maybe it's another line item somewhere, but the stated importance and critical nature does not reflect the spending set out here in the estimates that I see here. So I'm assuming that when Senator Reid is given the opportunity to address, we will then see where the allocation is and why the funding is where it's at. We all recognize, sir, the importance of cybersecurity. I wouldn't get up and say it's an existential threat, but it's a big deal. And the most critical piece of cybersecurity, put your hand up, is the individual, sir. You could have the best infrastructure in the world, but Senator Boyce gets his email saying, you've been selected to go Carnival for 2026, click on this link, and he clicks it, and everybody in trouble. This is just the reality of the world that we live in, and our aging population are extremely vulnerable to these phishing attacks. The financial institutions they have taken the necessary steps. My firm has taken extensive steps. We need to understand that this, not saying is a clear and present danger, but is a big deal. So the resourcing and the implementation, I'm assuming the government will be laying out how, what, why, when, and of course, it does speak to economic development if you can push the money for this area. It is huge, sir. But by the same token, at page 101, we have the Data Protection Commission. And the Data Protection Commission, sir, is languishing with $760,000 in 2025, and it's going down to $726,000 in 2026, and it goes up to $734,000 in 2027. Data protection goes hand in hand with cybersecurity and is increasingly important for those of us who have to deal with regulators and clients who want to know what's happening with their data. We debated the data protection bill in here. We had the discourse. It was a big deal. The data protection commissioner does her best with her with her staff. But where is the continued educational campaigns that were spoken about? Where is the public awareness? Where are the officers, the funding to investigate breaches? This ties into cybersecurity. This ties into a big deal. Now I know everybody wants money. And I know there's a limited amount, and I know the opposition make noise, but what are you doing with this money and why? But this, sir, is something which is important, which ties into the government's stated objective. And I would say, sir, that this is something which warrants some more attention. But maybe I'm just not seeing it within the subsector, and it would be addressed when the government seeks to amplify and clarify its position. So the first two items, sir, cybersecurity under head program, subprogram 0036, and data protection subprogram 0037. Important point, data protection, I believe, should be given more resources, if anything, just for public awareness as to what to do, not only in case of breaches, but the fact that citizens have certain data protection rights. Sir, I receive text messages about promotions. And if I were a certain type of guy, I would sue the person who's sending it to me because that's breach of the Data Protection Act. But the numbers that were given out during COVID, you remember, sir, the hard time, it was only 5 years ago, you had to spray your hand with the harsh chemical, write down your name and your phone number. Write down your name and your phone number, and you sometimes get a little ping. That information is now being used by some organizations. That's a breach of the Data Protection Act. Awareness is a big factor, sir. Sir, I can't leave without dealing, of course, with our beloved, and sir, again, lamenting investment opportunities. One of the chaps I listen to, Warren Buffett and the late Charlie Munger, they say, you invest in things that you know. So I'm not going to be willy-nilly about the estimate saying, look at it, no, I don't know certain things. What I do know, sir, along with certain people in here, is having to work within the registry and the Supreme Court. So I'm going to go to page 83 and page 84, sir, program 241, subprogram 247, registration department, page 84, program 242, administration of justice, subprogram 0248. Sir, the registry does the best with what they have. The registry was impacted by certain steps taken by the government in 2018 in terms of resources. I'm speaking very plainly, sir. The registry has, however, sought to bring in online filing, and Senator Nichols will tell you that we have online filing. But the problem is, sir, you have the online filing and you still have to bring the physical printout of the document that you filed. Don't laugh, Mr. President, it's true. You do the online filing and then you print out what you filed online and carry it to the registry. That's the reality, because the resources, the computer system, the storage, the print, it is not there. There are two officers within the registry who work hand over fist to try to get it done, but sometimes they are called out to support the judges. So if they are not there, your documents are not filed. This is the reality. They've gotten some better. Sir, we will tell you a story about a gentleman, I wouldn't call the full name, let's say Mr. H. And if you wanted to find a file, you go to the registry, you said, Mr. H, how you doing, sir? I was wondering if you could pull this file for me. And he said, that's no problem. And you go, you come back with the file. Sir, we miss Mr. H. Because you can't get a file pulled quickly. You could get it pulled, but it takes a while. So, sir, if we want to be this digital nation and transform, we have to give the people the resources to do the job so that the whole concept of filing, file retrieval, document management, protection, cybersecurity, data protection, that all comes into play and needs to be dealt with. We have seen an increase, sir, in terms of the funding. I'm talking about what is the reality of what is going on. So the question is, I assume it will be addressed, the resources for the registry to deal with the increased filing demand. We're still doing 2,500 cases in the civil courts per year. Management, docket information, retrieval, access to information. Judges will tell you, sir, and I'm going to go across now to the administration of justice part, sir, we have beautiful courts. Sir, the screens do not work in the courts. The document readers do not work in the courts. The judges have to take notes by longhand, which is writing. The criminal courts have transcriptionists, I believe. The criminal courts have automated communication. But the civil courts, they talk long. And the court of appeal. But the civil lawyers who like to talk the most. See, the civil lawyers who like to talk the most, the judges don't have the recording and transcription services. And sir, we're in an age where the recording and transition services can be provided in an automated form. So, sir, I could not have a debate without continuing to raise the issue of resources. Yes, we know about the backlog. Yes, we know about the criminal courts, but the civil courts need some love too. Research assistants. So the judges know, don't get me wrong, the concept of research assistants, sir, You say A, you say B. Sir, this AI is changing the world, and the research tools that the AI fellas are rolling out are pretty sophisticated. But I don't believe that we should have our judges doing the research. We could have a research assistant to help them with the AI interaction and the searches. The question is, how are we doing that on the quantum? So, sir, for my part, I am pleased to see that we're moving from 4.6 in 2024 to 6 million to 7 million. So my hope is in that increase, these issues will be addressed, because if you can't get your justice delivered, all the doing business, all the where we are or who we are, how we get things done, if investors do not feel confident that the issues can be resolved quickly, they're not coming. And sir, we have some judges now who are making us work. Not that we weren't working before, but certainly are taking a less generous attitude to delays. So we're being worked, sir. We're being worked. Actually, sir, I might be doing this so that if a judge asks why I wasn't present in his court, I can show him the transcript as to where I was. So, sir, this is what I'm saying. When we see the increase in funding, we are hopeful that that funding is utilized for the improved delivery of justice, not in terms of human resources, well, human resources for the registry, yes, but the tools for the judges to do their job in a quick as humanly possible while still doing what they have to do. You know, they say, sir, the wheels of justice grind slow, but they grind fine. Final area from within the estimate, sir, and I have no experience in this, sir, but I thought it prudent to raise it. Our Met Officer, that's what page 142, subprogram 0198. Sir, right now, the approved estimates for 2024 is 3.5 million. The total is 5.2. You know, I can't just, yes. All right, let me get at the bottom. Right, so at the bottom, the total subprogram is approved 11 million, revised 10 million, budget estimates 2025, 10 million, forward estimates 13, and another 13. Sir, we need that for the simple fact that our neighbors to the north have said they're reducing funding for NOAA. We relied on NOAA for hurricane hunters, and all of us like to go on our apps and track all kind of thing. And we could, you know, everybody is charting the course, and you send it to your neighbor, and you're doing whatever you have to do. We appreciate the effort of the gentleman there. I love the skits. I shared it with my family members. It's a good idea. We need to become more resilient. We need to start to look for alternatives. So I think, sir, given the importance of the Met Office, whatever they need, sir, I certainly support the attendant increase. And I would like to hear from the government with regard to what alternative funding may be sought to provide any coverage that we would be losing by the proposed impact for the NOAA offices in the United States, sir. So those are my questions or my comments with regard to the estimates themselves in terms of the quantum. And they were deliberately chosen, one, because they're areas which I believe the government can address in their response. So I would like the address and the response to be done, whether it's done in the government's wrap-up or in individual speakers. I believe they're topical, and I believe they will serve the nation in terms of the discourse. But sir, I want to wrap up on a question with regard to the government's policy. And why I say it's a question, just a moment, sir. Why it's a question with regard to the government's policy, and it's framed as such, we recognize that our roles as non-elected members is to suggest. We recognize that government sets the policy. To the victor goes the spoils, etc., etc. Sir, we understand and appreciate the government's position with regard to stabilization. There's no doubt I started off the debate by highlighting 2024 to 2025. Were I a government senator, were I a government senator, I'll be pounding the table with the facts. Can't get no talk about how you feel. They deal with the facts. They deal with the numbers. Now, however, in recognizing where we are, there must be a recognition of the burden that's been carried by Barbadians during this period. Now, that recognition has been stated, and the result is the government saying the sharing the bounty of the $300. Sir, I believe, though, that we need to pay a closer attention to what I call the middle class or the young professional class. I think, sir, the 90s babies, young professional class, have been carrying more than their fair share for a number of years, sir. And they are who I want to speak to and focus on in this portion of my presentation. Simply put, sir, they have been asked to hold strain for a long time. I have said many times in here that I personally benefited when I started practice a few years ago in 2000 under the Gordon Arthur regime, where you had certain tax incentives. You all have heard me say it already: credit union, stocks, whatever you wanted to put money into, you were given an incentive, sir. Sir, the effect of government policy without condemnation is an increase in indirect taxation. That's just the simple truth of it, sir. And of course, you know me, I show my working, sir. I'm referencing the Government of Barbados medium-term fiscal forecast, page 21. That medium-term fiscal forecast, as well as the recent central bank report of 24-25, it was stated transaction-based taxes contributed to the rise in indirect tax receipts. For want of a better word, sir, we know this is VAT. These are the other consumption taxes. This is the previous levies. So while there has been no increase of direct tax, whereas your tax rate has gone up, there is an increase in terms, of course, the consumption tax, sir. And, sir, the fact is that net VAT collections rose by 32.2 million, additional import duties and excises expanded. Now, we have the consumption tax, and of course we had the previous levies which are gone. But because of that combined effect, there was a reduction in the disposable income of these persons who were asked to share the burden. Again, with the proposed NIS increase for the purpose of the Resilience Fund, even though you say it's just $20, there's still a reduction in their available income, sir. I think the government has done the job of taking care of the lower socioeconomic group. It has done its job of being its brother's keeper, who we are, all the different euphemisms to say, let's take care of the most vulnerable. What I see, sir, though, is that we have young professionals out there who for a long period of time have been having a situation where their spending power continues to be eroded. Whether it's through imported inflation, whether it's through bad spending habits, whatever it is, they have been impacted and they have not been given any, let me rephrase that. They have been impacted by the increase in costs of living, as well as the consumption tax and the various levies. I think, sir, that the same way we have sought and have previously taken care of those in the lower socioeconomic group, now that things have stabilized, that we give serious consideration to what could be done for the young professionals, sir. So the same $300 that I stuck the first bit at, I think that's a good start, but I think more can be done, which we can base it on previous NIS contributions that were made. All the data is there, sir. And for persons who have been consistently paying in more, we can look and see what more they can be given. Sir, we have some low-hanging fruit. The foreign exchange fee, it would benefit everyone, but certainly young professionals who like to buy things of foreign thing is at 2%. We could take it down to 1.5. We could take it down to 1. Can there be some give now that the ship has, quote unquote, stabilized? Again, sir, the tax break for private pension plans. We need the private pension plans to supplement the NIS machinery. We have said that in here. We recognize NIS is at a certain level. We recognize that having to carry persons to a certain age means increased costs for all and sundry. So we want persons to take responsibility into their own hands, show their sophistication, go and do the investment for yourself. Well, how about the tax break for those private pension plans? The pensioners are being improved, thank you very much. The poor are being taken care of, thank you very much. Well, what about the professionals? What's being done for the young professional who's 28 years old, who's looking at you cross-eyed with regard to give? Well, what about for them? So I'm making this plea, sir. And one of the easiest ways, and I don't say easy in the sense, sir. I don't say easy in the sense that it can easily be done, but look at our current tax bans. Look at our current tax ban, sir. Once you pass a certain limit, everyone pays the same taxes. Why can't we introduce a ban for those who make more than $750,000 a year or more than $900,000 a year? We have capped it at a rate where we're taking care of the lower socioeconomic group, not recognizing that there's a middle class who's taking this heat, and they're doing, I say, sir, they're doing remarkably well. But there should be an area where we could find to give those who make more than $1 million a year. Why not reduce the lower band and introduce a new band? Just some ideas, sir. And sir, all these questions are being asked because there's little tax or investment opportunities locally. That's a fact. I keep on saying, turn on the news, look at the stock market report every day. Turn it on. We have the investments, the credit unions are now offering you some very good percentage rates, 3%, and if the government is correct, with the 1.5% inflation rate, you get a small gain. But the opportunity to do serious investment as a young person with any tax benefit or encouragement or support with regard to tax gain from the government is not there. So while I say, yes, bring on the unit trust, when will that come? Sir, the question remains, when it comes to policy, we have to consider how we economically enfranchise these young professionals. So it was hard getting assets back in 2000 and saving and doing whatever you have to do. It certainly hasn't gotten any easier. It has not gotten easier. At the end of the day, sir, I'm asking for dialogue, understand where the suggestions are coming from. If the ship has stabilized, we've taken care of the low income, can we do something for the young professional middle classer? I think the government has done what it said it was going to do in its medium-term fiscal framework. I think the reduction of GDP, debt to GDP, and the fact that there is a surplus speaks for itself. That speaks for itself, sir. I think a credit rating of B speaks for itself, sir. All those are positives. I think, however, there is merit in heeding the call for justification for expenditure. No one should be above having to show their working, sir. No one should be above that. There is merit, sir, in heeding the concern about over-reliance of our tourism sector. I think the leader of government business spoke to that effect and where we found ourselves during the course of the pandemic. There is merit to these cries, sir. But I believe for now that the government can be justified in saying that they have stabilized the ship. But if you say you've stabilized the ship, I would like you to do something for the young professionals. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Kevin Boyce. Senator John King.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for acknowledging me. And let me begin by thanking the senator before me for some of his comments. I just want to let you know that when you talk about ship, being stable. You have to remember, and I sailed on the seas for a number of years, that sometimes the ship is stable, but the water is rough. And I just want you to remember that. The ship is stable, but the water is still rough. I say no more of that. Mr. President, in 2018, this administration set some very precise targets. One, economic transformation. Two, sustainable growth. Three, global influence. And four, resilience. I'm going to go through them again because I want my colleagues to listen very carefully. Economic transformation, sustainable growth, global influence, and resilience. So let me break them down. Economic transformation. Why? Well, I don't have to tell the story of the period 2008 to 2018. I think every single person in here, including the leader of the opposition business, knows exactly how Barbadians felt at that particular point in time. People felt unprecedented anxiety. They had many sleepless nights. And some people refer to it as the lost decade. Sir, it was lost. People lost work. People lost money. People lost homes. People lost families. People lost confidence. And that last but not least, people lost hope in the ability of the then administration to put aside its wranglings and look after the business of the people who put them there. In 2024, in fact, in 2022, 23, 24, this same administration that speaks so eloquently about what this government should be doing, should not be doing, even making comments towards corruption, very serious things. I see that as your attempt to continue from your playbook of creating fear in the society, fear-mongering. But, sir, the thing is this.
Just for the purpose of answer, the president is not doing any such thing. So nobody refers to you. I know who you may tend to blame, but I just defended myself.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Please address the chair.
I would never do that. Thank you, sir. Through you, Chair. Through you, sir. That particular administration found itself in a whole set of wranglings. And because of these wranglings, they didn't have time to look after the business of the people. Therefore, sir, the people of this country in 2018 did what they felt they had to do to rebel against an administration that was basically sinking them. They took what I consider to be the best way to deal with things. They didn't go into the streets fighting, you didn't have civil war, you didn't have any of those things. They used the ballot box and said goodbye. They put in this administration and charged it with the responsibility of getting to work to recover this country. A task, sir, that has not been easy, and I'm sure that the Honorable Senator knows that. It has not been easy. There's no magic wand that you can do and do abracadabra, everything change. It takes time, and it takes planning, and it takes effort, and it takes, as was mentioned earlier, resilience. And things are going to happen step by step by step by step. It is like a person who is building a home, and I heard the other Honorable Senator talk about building homes for younger people and other things like that. But you know that there are not many people, sir, who can build a home out of pocket in this country. In fact, I dare say nowhere across the Caribbean. There are not many people who can build a home out of pocket. But they have to borrow money to do it. And they have to get loans. So let me just put it in the context of if you were building a house, since we are building back an economy and building a whole thing, you have to borrow money for that development. No one is going to lend you money if you do not seem to be able to repay. It's not going to happen. Because what? As we all know, as was mentioned earlier, banks and other things are in the business of making what? Profits. So this notion that keeps coming up every time we come into this chamber or in the public space by the opposition about we want to know how much you're borrowing, we want to know you asking the questions, the things are there all the time. You come and you open your things and you got all the information there, but it's still saying you want to know, but you got the information right in front of you. So I find that in itself interesting, because you have the information, you can see it, the central bank puts out its reports, and again, not suggesting that anyone is being untruthful or any of those things in terms of how they view things, but again, to create a scenario where people in the public who might not understand how these things work begin to believe that somehow the governor of the central bank and all the people who work there have the ability to give us false information. I have a problem with that. I have a real problem with that. Because it tells me that we are not having discussions rooted in just dealing with the facts, but that we are, again, fear-mongering, creating fear in the society. And we all know that when fear is created in a society or in an individual, people who are scared don't think very well because they are overcome by the whole emotions of fear. And if we continue on this trajectory all the time, every time we come to speak, when there are no facts to support the fear-mongering, all that is going to happen is that a wise Barbadian public will continue to hear but don't hear. And I always say to people, a word to the wise is enough. I'll say no more on that. Sir, this estimates that we're discussing continues on the building process of what we set out to do, as I mentioned earlier. But there are a number of things that keep coming up all the time in all the debates, and all of it keeps centering on what are you doing for the poor? The poor don't have this, and the poor don't have the next, and it just keeps going on. Well, if we look at the Ministry of Elder Affairs and People's Empowerment and Elder Affairs. They have, within their estimates, a number of programs that are geared towards dealing with the most vulnerable of people in the country, not just poor. You're dealing with people who have disabilities. You're dealing with the elderly. And dare say, you're also dealing with persons who this has become somewhat of something that some people in the world seem to think has disappeared. But I remember many years ago, this was a hot topic. Persons dealing with HIV. So I remember back when this was such a hot topic that Barbados took a decision back then to ensure that persons who are afflicted with this particular problem, medical problem, had free access to medication. It continues today, sir. No one is talking about some of the things that we've seen on social media about the apparent increase of cases across the region itself. So this is another vulnerable group. And sir, the thing about it is this, that it is not just for persons who are Barbadian citizens, but it's for anyone who lives in this country. Free access to life-preserving medication. If you go through and look and see, there are things there to deal with families, gender affairs. There's a One Family program where you have social workers and others going into the communities to work with families, not just to give people handouts, but putting programs in place where you make people employable, you educate them in a different way. You know, people used to talk about it all the time, Mr. President. You don't want to be giving a man a fish every day. You want to teach him how to fish so that he has some dignity, so that he can fend for himself and his family. All of this is happening. But every time we come to this place, or you listen to people in the other place, the question comes up all the time, what is this administration doing for the poor? On the subject of the prices, let us not fool ourselves. We are not immune to international shocks. If we were, it would be a good thing, but it would also be us living in La La Land, because it ain't real. And as small island developing states, we are more vulnerable than a lot of other places. And we continue to make this point all the time we come to this room. Barbados 166 square miles of what? It's a small landmass to start off with. And your people keep saying all the time, we ain't doing enough in agriculture. We're not doing this. I dare say, sir, that small islands like ours will always have a struggle between the usage of land for things like housing, infrastructure, development, all sorts of things, and agriculture. It is just the reality of where we live. No fault of anybody, not any government or any person, but it is the reality of where we live. And we have to get real about these particular conversations as it relates to what a government cannot do. It cannot afford to not house people. It also cannot afford to not feed people. It cannot afford not to take care of people by way of medicines and health and stuff. And it cannot not afford to educate its people. Even though, sir, a party or I should say, for a former administration that touted all the time about education, took the decision which they felt at that time they had to do to put a number of young people out of the opportunity to have a tertiary education. And we need to remind them that these questions that they're asking in terms of where the money gone and all these, people asked those questions of you some time ago, and there were no answers. No answers whatsoever, not up until today. But why do you think, therefore, that this particular administration has to continue to borrow and do all these things? It is because of what it came and found. Did they wake up a morning and decide, oh, we're just going to borrow money here willy-nilly because we have nothing else to do? It's to satisfy the needs of the people of this country. And if you go out onto the streets and you ask anyone, how do you feel in 2025 as opposed to how you felt in, let's say, 2017? You ask anybody on the road how they feel now. I am sure 99.9% of the people there feel more confident that things are being done properly, that their interest is being looked after, and that there's hope for the future for things to even get better. So let us not play these games, because I certainly don't play them, because I can speak from experience. That too. And you don't want me to start to sing it. But then that's when the real trouble starts. But the point is, you know, as a person who was here, I know what it is to lose a lot under a demolition party. I know what it feels like. Demolition party. Lost a lot of things. Yeah. And when I hear people continue to ask these questions, well, why does the Prime Minister have to travel so much and all of this stuff? People asked the question back then, where was Barbados when the world was discussing all sorts of things, from climate change to financing, all sorts of things the world was discussing. And if you ask all the time, where was Barbados? Absent. But how do you live in a world? You are a small island state. People are discussing things that will have a direct impact on you, and you are absent. You act as if you're the land El Dorado. You got gold all over the place. You don't need to talk to nobody. You good. This is the epitome of madness. The epitome of it, not just the epitome of madness. To absent yourself from global conversations, and 10 years later, when people have to do double work because you refuse to do anything, you're questioning why they have to go and do it. It's true. Huh? In fact, we should never, I always tell people that. Stop referring to it as the lost decade. They were glorious, according to some people. Glorious days. But I was like looking at West Indies cricket today, calling it glory days. That too makes absolutely no sense. So we have to get serious, sir, when we talk in this place in particular about what this government is doing and if it's making an impact or not, and all these sorts of things. If you go out on the street, sir, the One Family program, as mentioned earlier, is one of the programs that's been touching people for a long time. We've had people get involved during the pandemic. This government looked after people all across this island. As it should, I agree, as it should. We can say the same thing for former administration, as it should, but it didn't happen. But it didn't happen. But this government looked after people during that period. In fact, I dare say that this government and this administration put in place measures that the rest of the world started to look at and begin to follow. And so if you spend all of this money in providing for people during the pandemic, you turn around and you had a shock with a freak storms, all these different things. You were here, just some people act as if they were living somewhere else. You were here, you feel it, you saw it. But then we come and we say, oh, but the government should be doing a lot more, they should be doing that. What are they going to do? We still haven't gotten out of the hole that was dug by the previous administration. As was mentioned earlier, he said we stabilize. Yes, but stabilizing means that you yourself can manage to walk again or creep. But we're not running. And we're not going to be running until you get out of the mess that was created years ago. So we need, at this juncture, to get serious about these conversations. You have sporting activities that have, again, not been utilized to its maximum as yet, but it was interesting to hear the minister responsible for sport talk about the initiatives that they are taking to improve and to begin to create opportunities for our young people, looking at getting things to such a state where we have semi-professional persons and not just sports persons themselves playing the game, but all the auxiliary things that are needed. University of West Indies has its sports science program. It's putting out all sorts of different persons who are well qualified to deal with sport. And you start talking about diversification of the economy. Sport is one of those things that you have to begin to look at. But again, you have to start small and go. It is more than just infrastructure. I heard you, I hear you, I can hear you. But you would know that if you're talking about sports medicine, you need those people. You're talking about biomechanics and training and all those things, you're going to need physical education people, all of these types of things. You're talking about analytics. You're going to need all of those. All of these are areas that will be developed as you go along. But I want to come now to the whole idea of regathering. Because I sat very patiently and waited, I listened very carefully to the comments about regathering. It is sad, sir, and I'm going to say this, it is sad, extremely sad, when persons cannot separate political ramblings from projects or programs that are geared towards bringing communities together. It is sad, I will repeat, it is sad when we as politicians within these walls cannot separate the politics from the initiatives that are geared towards bringing people together. In case any of us in here do not remember what Regathering is about. Regathering is to contribute to building a strong and vibrant Barbados by fostering what? Family ties, empowering socially cohesive communities, creating sustainable livelihoods, diversifying the economy, and also contributing to protecting our environment. Those are the aims, and that is the mandate of Regathering. All of the other things that I've heard bandied about are, again, the ramblings and the dreams, I would say, of others. But what I know it to be is what I just described. And why are we doing this? Coming out of the same pandemic, many small businesses in particular went underground. No work, no economic activity. Regathering gives us the opportunity to help those persons which people coming here continue to say aren't getting any help. This program puts money into those micro businesses and small ones and medium-sized ones. It helps to bring the communities together. When you bring the communities together, what are you hoping to do through these programs? To give people new skills, to be able to be the ones who, as we go forward, produce the events that everybody keep talking about, or at least have a blueprint as to how you can do them and produce things yourself. Sir, I will put this to you. I have seen in England where small villages started a simple program. It's not a real one, but something like, for instance, World or Community Aid Day, whatever it is. And in 15 years' time, it becomes a global event where people from all over the world come and want to get involved in it. Regathering is doing that. It is giving people the opportunity to learn new skills and to also show off those that they already have. It is getting our people to move across the island to learn more about themselves, to also combat a lot of the problems that we're having with our younger people. You know, it is always easy to come up with these strange ideas. But if I look across the table and you and I have a relationship, it is less likely that I'm going to want to fight with you if I have a relationship with you. So as you move people across the country and you begin to make new acquaintances, this about that cohesiveness that we're talking about creating in the society, that is part and parcel of it. And when we talk about reconnecting with our diaspora, remember, many people left this country looking for a better life in different places, different parts of the world. Their offspring today, in many cases, have had no relationship with this country. Regathering gives us the opportunity to connect with those third, fourth, probably fifth generation Barbadians who may very well have skills that this country needs in its pursuit of its development goals. Who best do you look to? Especially when oftentimes I sit and listen to people saying about all the consultants that this government got. But if you get consultants that are Barbadians, I hope that will shut up some of the people. I doubt it will. But if you don't have the skills in your society, but where else would you go and get them? But I believe that by doing this process, and we begin to create a skills bank where we begin to know who we have, what they're capable of doing, as we go forward on this development trajectory, we can employ these people. And if I have more of a relationship with you as a country, it means that prices that I probably would charge an international person, I'm not going to do it because I got a relationship with you. So you got savings in the long run. You also have persons who may, again, decide that through their connection with Barbados, they may be the ones who decide that they want to invest in Barbados in businesses, or they may want to invest in a home, or they may want to come here. I'll give you a classic example. My niece was here only for 3 weeks, the very first time that she's come to Barbados out of Manchester, England. When she was leaving, the first thing she said to me, Uncle John, I am coming back here to live. I am coming back here to live. You know why? Because in the other place where she is, a lot of the things that they have to deal with, you don't have to deal with here. It's more of a sense of belonging. And she has her Barbadian citizenship. And so more of that will actually happen once people get to come here. Because the world around us is rapidly changing. And there's no better time to capitalize on those things than now. And we can't deny it. And so it is important that when we, again, seek to stir up these wranglings and ramblings, that you pay close attention to what is the real situation, what is really happening out there. So that we gathering, more than anything else, it's about us. It's not a Barbados Labour Party or thing. It says early from the beginning, what's it called? We gathering. Not everybody else gathering except you. We Barbarians. Yes, B for Barbados. Right? And this whole notion about every 5 minutes, you listen on the radio, you hear people asking, well, who is all these people that come home and all this? It's about who is here first and foremost. Building back these strong communities that most of us would have lived in, even though those communities back in those days may have been impoverished. The people had wealth. People had a lot of wealth. They shared. They looked out for one another. They knew everything about each other. These are the kind of values that you're trying to get back using this program. So that while we would like to turn it into a political football, to kick it up and down and say things like boycott it, which I would never be able to understand why any person would even suggest such. The thing is either, and I say all the time, when you don't know what you have, it is sad. But I can tell you, this country has made brilliant strides understanding its history. And I'm not going to say that all political parties have not contributed to them, because they have. But we know from history, if we look at it, that there's one party that people call upon every time they need or find themselves in trouble. And one party who continues to deliver time after time after time after time after time. So let us not pretend. Take off the blinkers and let's get real. Let's get real. People in the Republic know. I don't want to tell them. They feel it. They experience it. So the time has come where we must keep these discussions, especially within these halls, to the business of paying here. And these personal little attacks and these kind of things, they need to stop. They really do. We're big people. We're not children. We are not children. We leave that for little children in primary school and these kind of things. But when we come in these places, we deal specifically with what it is we have to deal with, which is the business of running this country to the best of our ability so that every citizen benefits. Not a B citizen, or a D citizen, or NDP citizen, or the time they got 4 new parties coming and don't know about the name. Not at all. Okay. Fair enough. I will wait and see. But the point is this. I really want to get back to being serious about this now. These estimates, if you go right across them, is a clear indication of the commitment of this administration to taking care of its most vulnerable people. We came here only last week and we debated the amalgamation of 4 specific entities into one. Reason being, you cut down on duplication, you use the resources better, and you also have a better communication. And when you hear me talk about a better communication, let me give a classic example. Having worked at Government Industrial School for a number of years, if you don't have good communication with police, good communication with the child care boards, or any of the other relevant agencies, you can find yourself dealing with a matter which could be more problematic than it should be if you had the requisite information. The same thing, I am sure, would have been happening in the past with the separation of all of these things. You got National Assistance Board going in to deal with something, but inside that same house where they may be going, you got a young person who may be getting into trouble and having a lot of problems. And you don't have any correlation between the two because the agencies that would definitely deal only dealing with specifically what it is that they're set out to do. So as you can see, in this particular ministry now, they're bringing all of these things together. It gives us a better opportunity to use the resources in such a way that, again, the information that is needed to tackle these jobs holistically becomes a lot easier, right? Therefore, when we talk about dealing with the most vulnerable people, I hope that I was able to at least shed some light, that you would at least understand what it is that this administration is trying to do by, one, amalgamating all of those entities and expanding what they do to deal with, again, the most vulnerable people within our society. It has been said over and over and over that a society is measured by the way it deals with its most vulnerable people. And so, therefore, if I use that as a yardstick, I would give this administration a passing grade for what it has been able to do, understanding that it is still dealing with the shock effects of a previous administration, and you have to look after those persons who were made poor by the policies and actions of a previous administration. It is as simple as that. You can challenge me on it all you like, but the truth will remain. No. No. The second, no. I hear the sides. I hear the sides. Hopefully one of these days.
Senator, I invite you to let me and do not hear them. Please press on.
Nonetheless, thank you. I'll stay very focused now. You go back to, let's say, some of the other things that were mentioned. And again, it always comes down to money. So it's really, really, for me, it is really interesting how this encapsulates every possible conversation that you have. Even though we are estimates, and the estimates are about money, everything is always about how much, and, you want to know what's it spending on, all of these things. I remember listening to a former member of parliament say that a country was more than an economy, that it was a society. And it is interesting that members of his party seem not to think that he was correct, because their actions and their approach to everything is completely opposite to his very important intervention at that particular point in time. But it is more than just the economy. And when you look at what has been undertaken to strengthen a lot of the other areas which you get the development that you need in the society, I mentioned what's happening in sport, I mentioned what's happening in the social areas through that ministry, but you also have to look at what's happening in education also. And none of us would ever deny the fact that education has been a pillar upon which, if not all of us, most of us have built our lives. And it doesn't have to be only just education in terms of university, and I want you to think of it in its broadest terms. And so therefore, when you have skilled persons coming out of places like Samuel Jackman and these other areas, you'll notice that as they expand, that you have those people who are in the forefront of building all the infrastructure that we need. It's interesting that at one point in time, they were saying all the time, we don't have enough skilled labor. And so you have to begin to look outside for this labor to do all the construction work that we're seeking to do as we go forward. It was mentioned about the amount of tourism-related infrastructure projects that are going to be happening as the year rolls out, this year and into next year. And where do you think those jobs should go to? Or who should get most of them? Our own local persons. But you have to be able to train them and to get them into these areas. And so when you have initiatives such as the National Transformation Initiative, NTI, that gives you the opportunity to get education again on a range of things. I'm told that there are over 10,000 different things that you could learn online. I mean, and if you heard that there are Barbadians in the diaspora itself who are asking if they can have access to it for them to benefit from that education, or if you understand that people from other parts of the world have been trying to hack it to get in so that they can have access to the education. You can't discount what may seem like insignificant things. But if other people from other parts of the world are seeing it for what it is and understanding how important getting this education is, how is it that we ourselves, who it was intended to empower, seem to, to dismiss it as being, nothing? But it's there and it's free. And I can tell you, it costs a pretty penny to put these things in place. So that when you're asking where the money going, I can point to initiatives such as that to show you where a huge chunk of money has gone to ensure that people have access to education. And for some unknown reason, we gloss over these things and we talk about all kinds of other things which really and truly, not that they don't need speaking about, but you also have to be able to balance it with what is actually happening in front of you. Otherwise, you paint a picture of pure gloom and doom, which is not real. And so, again, I want to commend this administration for all that it has been doing since 2018 to bring us to the point where honorable senators can say that the ship is stabilized. But I go back to my original point. Stabilization of the ship is not stabilization of the rough waters. They are two separate things. And so therefore there's still a long way for us to go. But what it will call for is something that a young man sang about many years ago. It calls for all hands on deck. All hands on deck. We may not agree on everything, which is fine. Which is fine. We don't have to agree. But what we do have to do is to support the things that we know are right and will get us to where we need to go. Because at the end of the day, whenever the task is done, and Barbados is back on a good footing, and everybody's happy, you cannot determine if it is B or D who enjoying the fruits of the labor of this particular administration. Right? Because it would be every single person when you go to work to do it. And I dare say to you, I dare say to you, that turn it around, and if we were to, God forbid, face a climate-related disaster, and you need help, you are not going to ask if the person is B or D when you need help. And I always say that there is a time, there is a place for everything under the sun. And even though we may have our differences on how to run, manage, or do what with this country, at the end of the day, all of us have to live here regardless. And it is incumbent upon all of us to desist from the fear-mongering, deal with the facts, and put your case to the general public. Mr. President, with those very few words, I am obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator King. Senator Andrew Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. President, for recognizing me. Sir, over the last few weeks, we have been treated to the articulation of a development path in this country, one that clearly establishes, sir, the appropriate responses to a global environment, that considers the domestic realities, Mr. President, but one that at its very core is really centers the experiences of the nation's people. Very often we associate the notions or the realities of growth and with this process, Mr. President. But there has to be, and there is, as evidenced by this Barbados Labour Party and this administration, a correlation between economic growth, Mr. President, and the growth and prosperity of the nation's people. And the pathway that the government of Barbados has articulated, Mr. President, includes the most vulnerable of our society. This administration has made it clear since 2018, no doubt, but particularly since 2022, that the improvement of the lives of the vulnerable, children, the elderly, persons with disabilities, are not separate and distinct from our growth and development pathways, Mr. President, but that they're an integral part of that pathway and progress. And as such, sir, throughout the work of through the work of the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, Mr. President, we have been treated to an expansion and a development in many instances of rights and protections that never existed before. So much so, Mr. President, that at the risk of sounding melodramatic, I may suggest that we are in the midst of a moment, sir, where this country has sought to provide protections and to recognize the existence of populations and to cater to those populations in ways that we have never done before. Sir, I refer specifically to the work done in child protection, the work done in disability, and the work done in relation to the elderly. In relation to child protection, Mr. President, I need not remind the chamber that we were functioning up until a few months ago on an archaic set of legislation. And it is perhaps not enough to describe it as archaic, but colonial. And that those various bits of legislation were imbued with the sensibilities of those times. Or lack of sensibilities, thank you, Senator Nichols. And suffice it to say that there are sensibilities that we have long abandoned. And We have now come to appreciate, Mr. President, or must now come to appreciate, because sometimes legislation not only reflects where we are, but tells us where we need to go. And I think that this is perhaps one example of such. That we will come to appreciate through this legislation, Mr. President, that we have to look after the best interests of our nation's children. And that the period of punitive measures, lick and lock up, if you will, are no longer with us. And that we have to apply a human rights lens, that we have to apply a series of protections to the care of our children, even and especially when they may behave other than we would wish, Mr. President. And so, child protection and child justice legislation is no doubt one of the pillars of the country's social protection program. It expands the legislation, and I should say policy, expands the available remedies, if you will, the measures that can be taken in the interest of a child, Mr. President, because up until a few months ago, we were in a position where there were very limited interventions that we could take, and those interventions did not always match the particulars of the circumstances that we were in. Sir, and then there is the Rights of Persons with Disabilities legislation. A piece of legislation, the first of its kind in this country. Never before has there been comprehensive legislation that sought to protect and to empower persons with disabilities in this country. It is no doubt, sir, a shame, really, that it has taken as long as it has taken, but no doubt the values of a Barbados Labour Party administration, sir, and a set of commitments of a Barbados Labour Party administration that has put its people first, all of its people first, is really what has gotten us to this point, and the administration ought to be applauded for it. That piece of legislation, Mr. President, has the capacity to shift culture in this country in a way that I don't think it has ever been shifted before. Persons with disabilities in this country, Mr. President, have, like I said, not benefited from the protections of the law, but it was not only a situation where they did not find space in the provisions of our laws, Mr. President. They're also subject to discrimination and intolerance, sir, in almost every area of life. So in employment and in education and in our built environment, Mr. President. And it is this, both the law and the policy, that has the ability to mechanize transformation in this country. last October, I was sitting at an event with the member for St. Michael South, the minister with substantive responsibility. And as he stood to speak, he apologized to the community of persons with disabilities in this country. Not on behalf of himself, but on behalf of, as he put it, successive administrations, Mr. President, that did not honor their commitments, Mr. President, to look after the least of us, the most vulnerable of us. And I thought it, sir, an interesting thing to do, because while you can bring legislation and you can bring policy, Mr. President, and proceed quite happily along, it was a moment, and if you were in the room, it felt like a moment of atonement. It felt like a moment of some magnitude, Mr. President. And it is that ethos that I think mechanizes the work that the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs is engaged in on the issues of persons with disabilities. Like I said, Mr. President, this administration has crafted interventions across almost every area that you can think of in relation to improving the lives of persons with disabilities. One of the interventions, and I've said it here before, one of the necessary interventions are interventions relating to improving the employment rates and status of persons with disabilities. Sir, the current data suggests that 90% of persons with disabilities are unemployed. And this administration, sir, is committed to beating back that statistic as best it can. And certainly within the last couple of weeks, we heard an announcement from the Minister of Labour in relation to that ministry's Job Start program and the fact that in furtherance of the law and policy in relation to persons with disabilities, that ministry is prepared to offer incentives to participants of the Job Start program. The Job Start program is, of course, a first jobs initiative, really and truly, for persons with disabilities. And the ministry is in the midst of rolling out that program at this time, Mr. President, and I wish to call on all Barbadians, certainly corporate citizens, to get involved in that program, get involved in really providing an opportunity for persons with disabilities to enjoy, I think, what so many others enjoy without thinking about it too much, which is the issue of the reality, rather, of employment and the attendant benefits, sir, of being able to look after themselves independently and all the rest of it. So that is also a part of the work that the ministry is engaged in. Continuously investing in the people of Barbados, and no doubt in the vulnerable, Mr. President. The Honorable Senator that preceded me, Mr. President, spent some time talking about the mechanism that animates or that will animate the operationalization of many of these initiatives. It is the Social Empowerment Agency. Mr. President, when last we were here, we spent some time focused on the legislation that establishes it. That agency, Mr. President, in my view, is set to be one of the more transformative initiatives that this country has seen in a very long time. It affects the kind of administrative efficiency, or it is set to affect the kind of administrative efficiency that is necessary in the provisioning of our social services, sir. It brings together, as we have heard, the National Disabilities Unit, the Welfare Department, the Child Care Board, and the National Assistance Board. And in so doing, Mr. President, it takes a fresh approach to the provisioning of social services. Very often, when we think about, we have a conversation in this country often about the ease of doing business. And when we think about the ease of doing business, sir, we think about it only in relation to our productive sectors, and only in relation to commerce and that kind of a thing. In the establishment of this entity, Mr. President, the government has recognized the critical importance of ensuring that the clients of any of these entities, all of these entities, will enjoy an ease of doing business, of relating with, whether it is the amalgamated entity, but whether it is for the services associated with the National Disabilities Unit, the Child Care Board, the Welfare Department, or the National Assistance Board. And there are two components, Mr. President, of the reform that I think are critically important. One being the network of offices that will bring services to the nation's people, closer to the nation's people, bring the services into communities, Mr. President. Because I don't think that we have fully understood before now, or maybe we understood, but we never did anything about it, the idea that having to make your way from your house, sir, into a central area, into one of our town centers, most likely, and to engage with services that far. I know many of us think of Barbados as very small, but those things represent real disincentives to seeking services. I think in the conversations that led to the establishment of this entity and the consultations, that's what we heard. We heard women say that, if I have $50 left and I live somewhere in the country, Mr. President, that the likelihood of me spending some portion of that to go into Bridgetown, into a central area, Mr. President, is reduced, or certainly to do that is difficult. That is not to negate, Mr. President, the fact that all of the services heretofore have been disparate. So if you wanted the Child Care Board, you had to go one place, and if you wanted the National Disabilities Unit, you had to go to another place. And I don't know, perhaps we have never fully appreciated that one person may come to need a set of services from more than one institution. And what does that mean, and what does it look like? And the other thing, in addition to the physical reality of bringing the provisioning of services into our communities, the other thing is the data sharing across those entities. It is also a disincentive, Mr. President, to have to share, if you in fact need the services of more than one of those institutions, to bare your soul to more than one social worker at more than one entity, Mr. President. And so this amalgamation really represents efficiency. It represents, I think, placing people at its core and investing in the shoring up of the country's social protection infrastructure, sir. Mr. President, a critical component of the development path that the government has laid out in recent weeks also is a set of family-specific policies, Mr. President. Because we all appreciate the reality that families are really the core of our societies, and where we intervene to look after the best interest of our families, we make good investments in the stability of our societies, sir. And so, the introduction of paternity leave and the expansion of the maternity leave benefit is an important pillar, Mr. President, in shoring up the nation's families, providing an opportunity for parents to spend a greater degree of time with their newborn or with their child, sir, and bonding in a way that develops the emotional connection that all of the data tells us is critically important to the proper socialization of the child. We propose to do this, Mr. President, we're doing this, Mr. President, in a moment where we're having a conversation about this country's population crisis. Just a few months ago, we debated in this place the national policy on population. And it outlined the stark demographic challenges, Mr. President, the consequences of being a super-aged society. But one of the other things that it did, or called for, Mr. President, were the introduction of policies aimed at improving the realities for persons who provide care, or gender-sensitive policies, sir. Before now, sir, certainly before the introduction of the 3-week paternity leave, a mother cared for her child and did not benefit from the, let me choose my words very carefully, did not benefit from the participation of a father insofar as he did not get, or in most instances, did not get the opportunity to spend time at home bonding with his new family or assisting her in those care responsibilities, Mr. President. These are investments in making Barbadian families stronger, and I think that the government ought to be commended for them. Still on the theme of families, sir, the government of Barbados, through the Child Care Board, has committed to increasing the number of foster parents. I think the number is 30, the goal is 30, Mr. President. And attendant to that goal is a proposed increase in stipends from $100 and $110 to $200, aimed at, no doubt, increasing the level of support for parents who are really doing God's work, because to care for a child, Mr. President, is no small feat. And to choose to care for a child that is not biologically yours is a similarly Herculean task, Mr. President. And so perhaps I should take the opportunity to call on parents, to call on individuals who are desirous of fostering children to apply and to contact the Child Care Board, Mr. President. And then, still on the notion of families, another pillar in this work of strengthening the country's infrastructure in relation to families is the notion of respite facilities for the elderly and for persons with disabilities. Mr. President, a great many of us have care responsibilities for the elderly, and the construction of these respite facilities and these daycare facilities are critically important, Mr. President, to the economy. I say the economy because in many instances they will provide an opportunity for parents and carers more broadly to go into the workforce and to contribute, Mr. President, without the burden of having to worry about if their child or charge is well looked after, Mr. President. I have spoken in here before about as part of the consultations as we were crafting the National Disability Policy and the law, mothers of autistic children sharing the horrors of attempting to balance the responsibilities of caring with the responsibilities as an employer, an employee, the responsibilities of earning, I should say. Suffice it to say, sir, that it is not an easy thing to do. And so the creation of these facilities are critically important in ensuring, sir, that persons who still have the interest in working, who still have to work for their own economic advancement, can do so, Mr. President, and worry less about where their child is and who is looking after it, and how do they balance those responsibilities. It is in that context, sir, that the government proposes to build at Sterling in St. Philip and Edge Hill in St. Thomas two facilities aimed at providing these services, Mr. President. No doubt, sir, these interventions are important, but they are also evidence of a sense of policy cohesion. We can't, and this administration has chosen not to, consider a population policy that tells us what ours tells us, consider a national disability policy that tells us what ours tells us, and not invest as it should, Mr. President, in the establishment of these facilities. Sir, just about a year ago now, the government of Barbados articulated the creation of a special needs benefit. And it identified rather, categories of individuals who would benefit. Those with multiple sclerosis and cerebral palsy and autism and Down syndrome. And there was a slight omission made, sir, as that policy was announced, because it was the intention of the government sir, to ensure that the deaf, the blind, and what the law refers to as the mute also benefited from that special needs grant. A special needs grant, Mr. President, a financial contribution from the government of Barbados aimed at aiding in the rearing and the raising of persons with disabilities. Thank you. And ensuring a quality of life, Mr. President. The reality is this. As much as we do, sir, want to increase the employment numbers in relation to persons with disabilities, there are individuals who, because of the severity of their disabilities, will never be able to engage in productive work. And what does a government that cares do in those instances? It establishes a special needs grant. It shores up the social protection mechanisms. It says, Mr. President, we will stand alongside you as this country seeks to improve your lives. And so, sir, 791 individuals have benefited from that special needs grant so far. And let me say that the omission of last year, of the deaf, the blind, and the mute, will now benefit from that contribution retroactively as of October 1, Mr. President. So that this is an administration that corrects its omissions, Mr. President. It is an administration that, as it expands the protections for persons with disabilities, recognizes, sir, that we cannot do it all at once, but that when we can, sir, we will seek to ensure that as many as possible are protected, as many as possible are catered for, and as many as possible are empowered, Mr. President. Sir, excuse me 1 second. In addition to the law and policy work that the Ministry of People Empowerment is doing, that ministry is called upon, Mr. President, to respond to people in circumstances of emergency. And in that vein, it has, as part of the Social Empowerment Agency to which I referred earlier, has created a resilience and reintegration unit, Mr. President, that in instances of fire, in instances of other types of emergencies, sir, springs into action to ensure, Mr. President, that individuals are not left without the proper support. Because it is entirely fine, sir, to craft a law and policy, but that cannot be divorced. Those efforts cannot be divorced from the emergency considerations, the things that are immediately necessary, Mr. President, and the things to which a ministry and a government ought to respond. And it is in that vein, Mr. President, that the ministry has increased the amount of rents that it pays for individuals who are without housing for one reason or another, like I said, fire or other types of emergencies, sir. And I think it is evidence, sir, of building resilience into our social protection infrastructure in a very real way, so that when I think we can all appreciate that resilience is a thread that runs through much of the country's policy, Mr. President, and absolutely it runs through the country's social policy. The country's marquee poverty reduction program, Mr. President, is referred to as the One Family Program. And it is a multi-pronged program aimed at poverty reduction. But it is comprehensive in nature. It uses a model, Mr. President, that says that you must look at the entire individual, that there are challenges and deficits across the human experience, Mr. President, that make it so that a person may be in the circumstances that they are in. And so the program provides assistance in relation to education and training. Of course, it provides the immediate assistance in relation to food. But one of the things that strikes me about the program is that there are a number of opportunities embedded in the program for education and training. We all appreciate, sir, that sometimes a person is in circumstances of poverty for want of an employment opportunity. And one gets an employment opportunity, certainly in these modern times, Mr. President, through education and training. And so there are hundreds of individuals enrolled in that program through the Barbados Vocational Training Board, the SJPI, the programs, Mr. President, offered in artificial intelligence and the like, Mr. President. And this is an opportunity to give Barbadians a chance, give Barbadians a real shot at moving out of the circumstances in which they have found themselves, Mr. President. And there is value in those interventions. Sir, the ministry, as it animates its work, as it carries out its work, Mr. President, values partnership a great deal. And one of the things that you hear so very often in its halls is the notion of partnership and the idea that that the government of Barbados, that the ministry in particular, cannot do all that it has achieved alone, and certainly cannot do it without the interventions and without the active participation and collaboration of NGO partners, Mr. President, and other individuals and other entities. And in furtherance of that partnership, sir, the ministry has increased the amount of grants to NGO organizations, the Barbados Council for the Disabled, the BAR, other organizations, Mr. President, that do important work in poverty alleviation and in people empowerment, Mr. President. And if you look at the schedule for the Social Empowerment Agency bill, it is not only, Mr. President, grants to those organizations or any kind of superficial collaboration with those organizations. It is proposed that as that entity is established, that those organizations will be represented on the advisory commission so that their experiences are fed into the ministry's work, and that partnerships valuable enough to benefit the people of Barbados come to be, sir. Mr. President, one of the other things that we heard in the articulation of this development path, Mr. President, is a focus on an investment in healthy habits and the 20% excise tax on salty junk foods, sir. On salty foods. And of course, this measure is added to the 20% tax on sugar-sweetened beverages, Mr. President, and things like our national nutrition policy. And these measures are timely at a time when the NCD burden concerns this country, Mr. President, when we are trying our very best to ensure that people shift their habits around the consumption of some of these foods. But of course, the government's commitment in public education in this area is also important, and the commitment over the next 2 years to engage in a robust public education program that highlights the importance of good consumption habits. And no doubt, Mr. President, of other areas of health and wellness is an important investment. The investment, the people-centered investment at the core of the country's development path, Mr. President, must of necessity include healthy individuals. And we must do what we can to ensure that we keep as many Barbadians healthy as is possible. So that I commend that particular intervention, Mr. President. You know, very often when we think about disability, we think about it in the context of those of us who are born with disabilities. And sometimes not sufficiently about the realities of those who come upon disabilities in the course of their lives. And one of the ways in which, Mr. President, many Barbadians come upon disability in the course of their lives is through NCDs. And so I appreciate the intervention, Mr. President. It is my hope that to see the public education rolled out soon and to see it taking root in our communities as we seek to shift culture around the consumption, around our consumption habits, Mr. President. Sir, the interventions that this government has made in improving the lives of people are unquestionable. The investments it has made in the crafting of law and policy that never existed before, and that seeks to recognize populations and empower populations that have been left out of the national project, Mr. President, is commendable. The way in which the linkages between so many of the policies articulated in these estimates, Mr. President, and the approaches taken in the work specifically of the Ministry of People Empowerment, but also in other important ministries as well, represents an appreciation, Mr. President, that all of our interventions must be strategic, that all of our interventions must be connected, and certainly that all of our interventions must inure to the benefit of the Barbadian people. It is this Barbados Labour Party administration since 2018 has not only, Mr. President, charted a path, I don't know why that was difficult to say, that encouraged the participation of Barbadians, that empowered Barbadians at every level, Mr. President, but also encouraged Barbadians to be better versions of ourselves in the interest of crafting better realities for this country. And no doubt, Mr. President, the government has walked hand in hand with Barbadians to improve their lives and to improve this country. Sir, and it is my hope, sir, and my absolute conviction that that partnership, that cohesion, that interventions in the names and in the interests of all Barbadians will continue for time to come, Mr. President. It is in that context, sir, that I commend these estimates to you. And with those very few words, Mr. President, I say thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Andrew Boyce. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move the suspension of this sitting of the Senate until tomorrow morning, Tuesday, March 18th at 10 a.m. in the morning.
The question is that this sitting be suspended until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. That's Tuesday, March the 18th. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. The session is accordingly suspended until tomorrow, Tuesday, March 18th at 10 a.m.